Mike Tyson once said something that stunned an entire room. Not a punch, not a threat, just a sentence. I would beat Muhammad Ali. The words didn't come with hesitation. There was no smile, no joke, no attempt to soften them. Tyson said it the same way he did everything in his prime, direct, fearless, absolute. For a moment, the air felt heavy. People shifted in their seats. Some laughed nervously. Others waited for an explosion. Because you don't just say that. You don't casually claim you'd beat the greatest boxer who ever lived. Muhammad Ali wasn't just a champion. He was a symbol. Speed, confidence, mind games, courage. A man who didn't just win fights but owned moments. And now here was Mike Tyson, younger, stronger, more violent than anyone had ever seen, calmly suggesting that Ali wouldn't survive him. All eyes slowly turned toward Ali. People expected anger, defensiveness, a sharp comeback. But Ali didn't react the way anyone expected. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't remind Tyson of his legacy. He didn't list his titles or replay his greatest victories. Instead, Ali smiled. Not a mocking smile, not a forced one. A calm, knowing smile, the kind that made people uncomfortable, because it suggested he saw something others didn't. The room grew quiet, not because Ali demanded attention, but because his silence demanded patience. Tyson stood there confident, almost daring Ali to challenge him. This was the same Tyson who terrified opponents before the first bell. The same man who believed fear won fights before fists ever flew. And in that moment, Tyson believed he was speaking truth. But Ali wasn't listening to the words. He was listening to the mindset behind them. You could feel it, the shift. This wasn't about boxing anymore. This wasn't about who hit harder or who was faster in their prime. This was about understanding something deeper. Something Tyson hadn't learned yet. Ali leaned forward slightly, eyes relaxed, voice calm. And when he finally spoke, what he said didn't just respond to Tyson's claim. It dismantled it. Because Ali didn't argue about strength. He didn't argue about speed. He didn't argue about power. He spoke about something far more dangerous. And as the room listened, it became clear, this wasn't going to be a debate. It was going to be a lesson. And by the time Ali finished, even Mike Tyson understood one thing. Some fights are decided long before the first punch is thrown. To understand why Mike Tyson felt confident enough to say he would beat Muhammad Ali, you have to understand who Tyson was at that moment in his life. Mike Tyson wasn't just a boxer. He was pressure in human form. From the time he stepped into the ring, opponents were already defeated. His presence alone broke people. Short, explosive, and merciless, Tyson didn't fight long battles, he ended them quickly. Fear was his greatest weapon, and he knew how to use it. When he spoke, it wasn't trash talk. It was conviction, and behind that conviction was belief. Tyson grew up watching Muhammad Ali, studying him, admiring him. Ali was the standard, the man everyone was measured against. But Tyson didn't worship Ali the way fans did. He respected him as a fighter, then measured him as one. And in Tyson's mind, styles made fights. Power met speed, youth met experience. And Tyson believed his aggression would overwhelm anything Ali had to offer. From Tyson's perspective, this wasn't disrespect. It was honesty. Muhammad Ali, on the other hand, was in a completely different place. His fighting days were behind him, but his understanding of boxing had only deepened. Ali had been through eras. He had faced giants, technicians, brawlers, and strategists. He had been doubted, written off, and underestimated more times than he could count. And every time, he learned something new, not just about boxing, but about people. Ali didn't just see punches. He saw patterns. He saw emotion. He saw ego. Where Tyson believed dominance came from intimidation and force, Ali believed control came from patience and timing. He knew that raw power could win fights, but only when paired with discipline. Without it, power became predictable. And predictability was something Ali had built an entire career destroying. As Tyson spoke confidently, Ali listened carefully. He wasn't offended. He wasn't defensive. He was curious. Tyson's words revealed exactly how he viewed boxing, and more importantly, how he viewed himself. To Ali, that was far more important than the claim itself. The room may have seen two champions from different generations, but Ali saw something else. He saw a young lion who believed strength alone was enough. A fighter who had never been forced to wait, never been dragged into deep water, never been denied immediate victory. And Ali understood something Tyson didn't yet realize. When speed fades and power slows, what remains is the mind. This wasn't going to be about proving who was better. It was going to be about exposing what truly wins fights. And Ali was about to show Tyson that confidence without understanding can be the most dangerous weakness of all. The moment Mike Tyson finished speaking, the tension in the room didn't explode, it tightened. People expected Muhammad Ali to respond immediately. A sharp line, a clever comeback, something loud enough to defend his legacy. After all, Ali had built part of his greatness on words just as much as fists. If anyone knew how to dominate a moment verbally, it was him. But Ali didn't rush. He sat there calmly, almost relaxed, as if Tyson's statement hadn't threatened him at all. That alone unsettled people. Tyson was used to reactions, fear, anger, pushback. Silence wasn't something he encountered often, especially not from someone he had just challenged. Tyson stood tall, unblinking, certain of himself. In his mind, the logic was simple. He imagined pressure. He imagined speed cutting off the ring. He imagined raw force meeting a man from another era. To Tyson, the outcome felt obvious. His confidence wasn't arrogance to him, it was preparation. Ali finally looked up. Not with irritation, not with pride, but with focus. When he spoke, his voice was steady, almost gentle. He didn't say Tyson was wrong. He didn't dismiss his power. In fact, he acknowledged it. And that was the first crack in the moment. Ali spoke about strength, not as something to fear, but as something that can be managed. He spoke about speed, not as a gift, but as something that fades. And as he spoke, it became clear he wasn't talking about a fantasy matchup anymore. He was talking about experience. Ali explained that boxing isn't just about what you can do in the first round. It's about what happens when things don't go your way, when punches miss, when frustration builds, when the opponent refuses to break. He spoke calmly, almost conversationally, but every word landed with weight. Tyson listened. At first, he stayed confident, but slowly something shifted. Ali wasn't challenging his strength, he was questioning his patience. He wasn't attacking his power, he was examining his reactions. Ali described how pressure can turn into recklessness, how aggression, when unanswered, can become desperation. The room grew quieter. Ali talked about timing, about letting an opponent reveal himself, about how ego pushes fighters to make mistakes long before exhaustion ever does. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't dramatize the moment. He simply explained, and that's when it started to feel different. This wasn't a debate. This wasn't a comparison. This was a breakdown. Ali described how a fighter who relies only on force begins to chase results, how chasing creates openings, how openings create consequences. He spoke as if he had seen this story before, because he had many times. Tyson didn't interrupt. For the first time, he wasn't visualizing victory. He was visualizing scenarios, situations he hadn't considered, moments where control mattered more than power, and that realization crept in quietly, without announcement. Ali paused briefly, letting the silence do its work. Then he said something simple, something that didn't sound dramatic at all. But it landed harder than any insult could have. He made it clear that fights aren't won by proving how strong you are. They're won by understanding when strength works against you. That was the moment the room understood this exchange had changed. Ali hadn't dismissed Tyson. He hadn't embarrassed him. He had done something far more unsettling. He had reframed the entire conversation. And as Ali finished that thought, Mike Tyson realized he wasn't being challenged as a boxer. He was being challenged as a thinker. Muhammad Ali let the silence sit for a moment longer than most people would have. Not to intimidate, not to dramatize, but to let understanding catch up. He knew that real impact doesn't come from volume. It comes from clarity, and when he continued, his words didn't sound like a rebuttal. They sounded like a conclusion. Ali spoke about control. Not controlling the opponent, but controlling yourself. He explained that the most dangerous fighters aren't the strongest or the fastest. They're the ones who remain calm when nothing is working. The ones who don't panic when their power doesn't end the fight early. Ali talked about frustration as if it were a physical opponent, something you could lure, tire, and eventually defeat. As he spoke, the picture became clearer. Ali wasn't imagining standing toe-to-toe with Mike Tyson trading punches. He was imagining time. Rounds passing, moments stretching longer than expected. He described how pressure loses its sharpness when it isn't rewarded. How aggression, when unanswered, slowly turns inward. He explained that when a fighter expects dominance and doesn't get it, something dangerous happens, not to the opponent, but to the fighter himself. Judgment slips, movements rush, breathing changes, and suddenly strength becomes predictable. Ali didn't say Tyson would lose because he wasn't good enough. He implied that Tyson would lose because he hadn't been forced to wait. Ali spoke about patience the way other fighters speak about power. He described it as something you build, something you train, something you rely on when instinct fails. He talked about how waiting isn't weakness, it's strategy, and how the ability to delay action is often what separates champions from legends. Mike Tyson stood still, listening. This wasn't the kind of conversation he was used to. He was used to dominance being immediate, to fear settling in early, to opponents folding quickly. Ali was describing a situation where none of that happened, where force met resistance, not physical resistance, but mental resistance. Ali described how he would let momentum fade, how he would let expectations collapse under their own weight, how he would allow confidence to become impatience, and how impatience, once exposed, creates openings no amount of power can fix. There was no insult in his tone, no arrogance, just certainty. Ali made it clear that he wouldn't need to overpower Tyson. He would need to outlast the moment Tyson expected victory. He would need to stay relaxed while Tyson searched for answers. And in that search, mistakes would appear, not because Tyson lacked skill, but because pressure demands resolution. The room felt different now. People weren't watching two champions compare greatness anymore. They were watching a master explain the anatomy of a breakdown. Ali wasn't attacking Tyson's belief, he was calmly placing it under a microscope. And that was the turning point. Because Tyson realized Ali wasn't afraid of his power. Ali had already accounted for it. The realization didn't come with shock or embarrassment. It came quietly. Tyson began to understand that Ali wasn't speaking hypothetically. He was speaking from a place of deep familiarity. With fear, with doubt, with the moment when confidence starts to slip. Ali ended his thought without drama. No final jab, no clever punchline, just a simple understanding. Fights are decided by the fighter who remains himself the longest. And in that moment, the energy shifted completely. Mike Tyson wasn't standing across from a legend defending his past. He was standing across from a man who understood the future of every fight before it arrived. And Tyson knew. This wasn't about who would hit harder. It was about who would still be standing mentally when the fight stopped going according to plan. The conversation didn't end with applause or arguments. It ended with something far more revealing, quiet reflection. The kind that lingers long after words stop echoing. Mike Tyson didn't respond right away. He didn't defend himself. He didn't double down on his claim. He simply absorbed what had been said. And that silence said everything. For someone like Tyson, silence was unfamiliar territory. His entire rise had been built on immediacy, quick knockouts, instant dominance, early fear. He was used to being the storm that arrived without warning and left no room for adjustment. But Ali had just described a scenario where the storm didn't end the fight. Where it passed, weakened, and left behind stillness. That idea stayed with Tyson. It wasn't that Ali had proven he would win a hypothetical fight. He had done something more unsettling. He had exposed a question Tyson hadn't asked himself yet. What happens when intimidation fails? What happens when strength doesn't resolve the moment fast enough? What happens when the fight demands patience instead of violence? Tyson had never needed to answer those questions. Until now. As people reflected on the exchange, it became clear that Ali hadn't been speaking to embarrass Tyson or protect his legacy. He had been teaching, not in a loud, dramatic way, but in a precise, almost surgical way. Ali didn't challenge Tyson's greatness. He challenged the limits of his understanding, and that distinction mattered. Tyson later acknowledged how much Ali's mindset affected him. Not immediately, not dramatically, but over time. The more Tyson experienced boxing beyond early round dominance, the more Ali's words began to make sense. Fights became longer. Opponents became smarter. The ring became less predictable. Ali's lesson aged well. What made Ali devastating in that moment wasn't his confidence, it was his restraint. He didn't need to win the exchange emotionally. He didn't need validation. He didn't need to assert superiority. He let clarity do the work. And clarity, once introduced, doesn't leave easily. The fallout of that conversation wasn't public humiliation. It was internal change. Tyson began to understand that greatness wasn't just about what you impose on others. It was about what you withstand yourself. Ali had survived doubt, exhaustion, pressure, and expectation. He had learned how to exist inside discomfort without rushing to escape it. That was the difference. People often remember Ali for his speed, his footwork, his charisma. But moments like this revealed his real weapon, perspective. He could see beyond the surface of a challenge. He could recognize patterns before they formed outcomes. And he could explain those patterns without hostility. For Tyson, this wasn't a loss. It was an awakening. The idea that a fight could be lost mentally before it was lost physically lingered. The realization that patience could neutralize power reshaped how Tyson viewed boxing, not as pure domination but as layered confrontation. A test of discipline as much as destruction. And that understanding didn't come from defeat. It came from conversation. Ali had shown that true authority doesn't need to announce itself. It reveals itself through calm certainty. Through the ability to explain rather than react. Through the confidence to let others arrive at conclusions on their own. The fallout wasn't loud. It was lasting. And as time passed, it became clear that Ali hadn't been defending who he was. He had been defining what greatness actually means. With time, the meaning of that exchange became clearer. Not just to Mike Tyson, but to everyone who understood boxing beyond the surface. What Muhammad Ali had offered wasn't a prediction or a challenge. It was a perspective. And perspective, once earned, has a way of reshaping everything that follows. Mike Tyson's career continued, and with it came experiences that power alone couldn't solve. Fights lasted longer. Opponents didn't break as quickly. Moments arrived where strength met resistance instead of surrender. And in those moments, Ali's words quietly resurfaced, not as criticism, but as guidance. Tyson began to understand that dominance isn't just about imposing will. It's about sustaining control when momentum slows. The fear he once relied on didn't always appear on command. And when it didn't, the fight demanded something else: composure, adaptability, patience. These weren't qualities Tyson was known for early on, but they were qualities Ali had mastered. Ali's greatness had never been confined to his physical gifts. He had outgrown them. When speed faded, his mind carried him forward. When strength was tested, his understanding protected him. He knew how to navigate uncertainty without panic, how to let situations reveal themselves instead of forcing conclusions. That was the resolution Ali had demonstrated without ever framing it as advice. Tyson eventually spoke about Ali with a depth that went beyond admiration. He didn't just respect Ali as a champion. He respected him as a thinker. Someone who understood that fights are mirrors. They reflect back whatever a fighter brings into them. Confidence, fear, patience, ego, they all return amplified. Ali had brought calm, and calm under pressure is devastating. What made Ali's response so powerful was that it didn't require proof. It didn't need validation through action. It existed independently, grounded in experience rather than speculation. Ali didn't need to convince anyone. His certainty spoke for itself. In that sense, the resolution wasn't about who would win an imaginary fight. It was about who understood the fight best. Ali showed that true mastery isn't loud. It doesn't need to dominate every moment. It waits, it observes. It responds only when necessary, and when it does so with precision. For Tyson, this understanding marked a shift. Not a complete transformation, but an expansion. He began to see boxing as more than a test of power. It became a test of restraint. A measure of how well a fighter could remain composed when instinct demanded action. Ali's lesson didn't change Tyson overnight, but it stayed with him, and that's the mark of real influence. Ali had resolved the exchange without conflict, without superiority, without dismissiveness. He had allowed Tyson to retain his confidence while quietly showing him its limits. That balance between respect and truth was what made the moment endure. In the end, Ali didn't walk away having defended his legacy. He walked away having reinforced it. Because legacy isn't built on what you claim. It's built on what you understand. And as Tyson continued his journey, one thing became undeniable: Ali's impact extended far beyond the ring. He shaped how fighters thought, how they prepared, and how they defined strength. The resolution wasn't closure. It was continuation. A passing of understanding from one generation to the next. When people look back at moments like this, they often focus on the names involved. Mike Tyson, Muhammad Ali. Two giants from different eras linked by a single sentence and a single response. But the true power of this moment has very little to do with boxing. It has everything to do with understanding. Ali's response wasn't devastating because it was clever. It was devastating because it was calm. In a world that expects noise, defense, and confrontation, Ali chose clarity. He didn't try to win the moment. He let the moment reveal itself. And in doing so, he showed something far more important than superiority. He showed wisdom. The real lesson here isn't about who would win a fight. It's about how people respond when their identity is challenged. Mike Tyson represented raw certainty. Confidence forged through dominance. Success built on immediate results. And there's nothing wrong with that, until certainty becomes the only tool you trust. Ali understood that strength without understanding eventually meets a wall. Not a physical one, but a mental one. Ali's greatness came from knowing when not to push. He knew that real power doesn't need to announce itself. It doesn't rush to prove anything. It waits, it observes, it chooses its moment carefully. That kind of power doesn't fade with age, speed, or strength. It deepens. That's why Ali's words still matter. They weren't meant to belittle Tyson. They weren't meant to protect Ali's image. They were meant to illuminate a truth that applies far beyond boxing. Confidence is only dangerous when it's paired with awareness. Without awareness, confidence becomes fragile. In life, we all face moments like this. Moments where we're sure of ourselves. Where we believe our ability, position, or momentum guarantees success. And sometimes, it does. But eventually, every path presents a challenge that doesn't respond to force. A situation that demands patience instead of pressure, thought instead of action. That's where many people struggle. They push harder. They speak louder. They rush faster. And in doing so, they create the very mistakes that hold them back. Ali understood this long before it became obvious. He understood that restraint isn't weakness, it's discipline. The most devastating response isn't always the loudest one. Sometimes it's the quiet explanation that exposes what the other person hasn't yet learned. Ali didn't need to say he would beat Tyson. He didn't need to prove anything. He allowed Tyson, and everyone watching, to see that true mastery lies in knowing yourself under pressure. In remaining composed when certainty starts to crack. That's why this moment still resonates. Because it reminds us that greatness isn't about overpowering others. It's about outgrowing the need to. It's about recognizing when to act and when to let time do the work. It's about understanding that real authority doesn't compete, it clarifies. Mike Tyson didn't walk away diminished by this exchange. He walked away challenged. And being challenged is often the beginning of growth. Ali's legacy wasn't built only on victories. It was built on moments like this, where he demonstrated that wisdom outlasts speed, understanding outlasts strength, and patience outlasts fear. That's the lesson worth remembering. Not just for fighters, for leaders, for creators, for anyone navigating pressure, ambition, or self-belief. Before we close, take a moment and think about this. Have you ever been so confident in something that you didn't stop to consider another perspective? And if someone had calmly pointed it out, would you have listened? More powerful stories like this are on the way. Stories about moments that changed people, not through force, but through insight. If you enjoyed this breakdown, let us know which part stood out to you the most, and what kind of stories you'd like to see next. Your feedback helps shape what we create going forward. Thanks for watching. More good videos are coming.